This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Major and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Makailah Dowell. With lived experience in bulimia nervosa and BED, binge eating disorder, Makailah recovered while facing many treatment accessibility barriers and, through that journey, discovered a passion for pursuing healthcare equity. Makailah graduated from Johnson & Wales University with a bachelor's degree in biology with an emphasis on microbiology research and continues her work with EQUIP as a lead peer mentor. She is dedicated to highlighting the BIPOC experience in the healthcare community, disability advocacy, and providing affordable and accessible care for all.
Welcome, listeners, to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces. Season 4, Episode 136. This is Healthcare Equity, Peer Support, and Advocacy with Makailah Dowell. We have an incredibly informative and heartfelt show for you today. This podcast is made possible by two eating disorder nonprofits, the Emily Connection, founded in memory of Jack's and my daughter, Emily Major, and KMB for Answers, founded in memory of Ellen's daughter, Katlyn Bennett. Our special guest, Makailah Dowell, will be with us in just a minute. But first, I need to welcome my co-host, Ellen Bennett. Hello, Ellen.
Hello. So excited to be here and doing this podcast. And of course, our missing third, Jack.
No, Jack can't be with us today, but he's with us in spirit. But he has a few questions here and there that we'll make sure we get those in for Makailah too. So I'm going to start with our quote. So you ready, listeners? You ready, Ellen? My quote is, "Health equity is crucial because it's fundamental to living a good life and building a vibrant society," by Sinead Taylor from Northwestern University. What do you think of that, Ellen?
Health equity, it is a huge issue that we all need to be talking about. And it's a reality for far too many, and it impacts all of us. And so this topic, we all need to be talking about it. We all need to make it a priority. So today's conversation is very, very important.
Oh, I agree. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Makailah. She is bright, well-spoken, incredibly giving of her time and sharing of her gifts. She is one of the kindest, most enthusiastic people you'll ever meet. I know this because Jack and I met her last year at the 2023 Meta Conference, and we were honored to speak at that conference, and we had a table there, and she was just wonderful and kind, and she bought our book, and we started a relationship, and she has become a very, very good friend, and she offered to help us with our nonprofit, and she now co-facilitates our monthly virtual support group for the Emily Connection for adults with eating disorders, and we call it Forward Together. In addition to being a lead peer mentor for EQUIP and helping us, she also volunteers her time with two other amazing organizations she will tell you about later. Welcome, Makailah.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for bringing me on. I'm so excited. I hope everyone can hear my smile through this conversation, because I probably will be smiling a lot, and some of the things I'll be saying I probably won't be smiling. So we'll do a little 50-50, right?
Yeah. Yes. So do you have an earliest memory when you were a child? What is your earliest memory? I always think those are significant. And can you share what your life was like growing up and about your person, your grandma, and your relationship with her?
My person, the love of my life, as I say, my grandmother. Yes, absolutely. I can share about her. It's funny when you put this question up. I was a bit prepped, y'all. So I was prepped with the questions a little bit. So when I looked at it, I kind of was sitting at it and looking at them in my bed and just laying down and thinking about it. And I was like, am I honest? Do I tell the truth about what my first memory is, or do I tell them like my good truth, right? Like the good memory, one of my good first memories, or the real first memory, right? And I sat down with myself and I said, you know what? I'm going to tell them the truth, right? I want them to know what life looked like when I was kind of coming into this and how it really impacted my own mental health and also my eating disorder. One of my first memories, I was about 3 or 4. I can't remember. It was in between that time, right? And it was hard. I was actually being placed in the back of a police car as a young kid because I was in the midst of a custody battle. And this custody battle wasn't one where one person should have me. My grandma knew that I needed to be in a home where I was stable, secure, and had food and access to things for safety needs, right? So that was one of my first memories, was my grandma, my person, fighting for me to actually be in her care and be adopted by her. And that was one of the first steps that took us to where we are together. But it is one of my first memories because it was one of the most traumatic, right? I don't think 3 or 4-year-olds are used to being around such high intensity moments, right? And high intensity emotions around adults, and especially high authority. In the BIPOC community, especially being around high authority, such as police officers, things like that, can feel very unsafe, right? And so for me, that was one of my most unsafe moments, and also one of my first memories, which is a 2-in-1, right? It's very interesting.
Wow, I had no idea. Can you tell us when you first realized that you had an eating disorder, and maybe when you got help? I mean, that was a huge transition for you to be with your grandma, and obviously a very important, loving one. But it's still change, and I think we always just kind of circle back when things happen as to what was a catalyst for this or that. So can you tell us a little bit about that if you're comfortable with it?
Of course. I think as humans, we always want to know the why, right? I think that's human nature. What's the why behind this? I'm so curious. Tell me all the answers and give me all the information. Even if it's not good for us, give us all the information, right? I've always been like that too. I'm also very nosy. I think I can put that on my radar. I was like, I want to know everything. You better tell me it, right? And so for me, growing up from that hard situation, we faced homelessness, food insecurity, lower socioeconomic status. We could never surpass the definition of poor, obviously. And that was us as a family of 2. So we were bouncing a lot from Arizona, and, that lack of stability kind of led us up to northern Idaho, which beautiful, if you've never been up there, beautiful, beautiful area, beautiful place of the United States, and one of the least diverse places, and tough to find access to care when you're up in northern Idaho. And so when my eating disorder first came, I really didn't know about eating disorders. I kind of was just doing my thing, right? I was just hanging out, being an adult. And, one of the first memories that came up for me, though, is I was young. I remember I was around 10 years old, and I made this one decision, Ellen and Linda. I'm sure you all can remember this decision of picking the salad over the bird, whatever that one decision that really stuck with you in your life. This was my one decision at 10 years old that still sticks with me and makes me emotional, to be really transparent with you. But I made this decision during the summer to go from regular Coke to Diet Coke. And everyone cheered me on. Everyone was cheering me on. And everyone was supporting the fact that I had lost weight over the summer just by this one change, right? Wow. So in my head, as a young kid and having this positive reinforcement, I thought, oh, so if I make additional changes, right, will I be cheered on more? Will I be supported more? Will the people around me who never talked to me ever, were actually kind of my big bullies, they got quieter, right? And so it was this positive reinforcement with a decision that I actually didn't want to make. I liked Coke. I like Pepsi. I like soda, okay? And so to make that decision and then to be cheered on by it was really disheartening. And that was one piece that tied for me, right? Is, that time in between the summer of 4th grade and 5th grade, that moment has stuck with me ever since, because that was the moment I got popular. People actually talked to me. I wasn't alone in the corner. So that was one of the first times for my eating disorder to really recognize and to understand where it was coming up.
Wow. That's a powerful statement when you reflect on those things. And it kind of resonates with me because Katie was first diagnosed at age 11. So it was that same time period. And I don't know what was the reason her eating disorder kicked in, but it was something like that. It had to have been, whatever it was, a comment, a change in behavior.
And if the community you were living in wasn't diverse, you already felt different, and you said you were bullied. Oh, that just breaks my heart. It just does. And it's still going on today on even broader level with social media and the things people do to each other, kids do to each other. Well, I'm glad.
I think you highlighted something very important there too, Linda, of it wasn't even just that first level, right? Of let me be smaller to be accepted. It was let me fit into this ideal, because I already look different than all my peers. I already look different, so I can't have any more different, right? I can't have any more pieces of what they can make fun of me. So I almost had to just fit in line a little bit. So I'm happy you highlighted that, Linda.
Well, and I'm sure you had a heightened awareness of that. As much as you probably didn't have vocabulary, words for it, you knew. And I think that's one of the things about that whole aspect is people don't really realize that the individual is highly aware, heightened awareness of when they are being picked on, bullied, or whatever. And that negative messaging is so hurtful and impactful and can have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely can. So you felt different. All of a sudden, you're accepted. You have more friends, but it didn't stop at that point.
No, it did not stop at that point. It was interesting. So once you which, like you said, Ellen, I didn't have the vocabulary. I was kind of going off the whim, right? I was guessing what I was doing, right? And so was my eating disorder. So once my eating disorder became extremely active, I started with binge eating disorder and definitely some restrictive behaviors that were coming in. If I had been diagnosed at 10 or 11, it probably would have been ANR and BED, right? But I wasn't. So I started with a bit of restriction and binge eating disorder, otherwise known as BED. And that morphed, right? So for specifically, I want to say for Black and Latino women compared to white women, binging and behaviors are actually way more common in these communities, right? So my binging actually turned into binging and purging. So I had bulimia nervosa by the time 2 years later, right? By the time I was in my young teens. And so I was actively struggling with this eating disorder, and it had morphed to a whole new problem I didn't even know it was going to morph into, if that makes sense. And I didn't know what I had signed up for. I just signed up for peace. I just wanted to be left alone. I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be facing racism or marginalizedness. I didn't want to be different, to be really transparent with you. If anything, I wanted to be the most plainest person in the room, right? The person that no one would talk to or look at or even have a comment about. And even now when I reflect on that, it makes me really sad, because that's not how kids should feel.
Right? Not at all.
Kids should feel, they should be able to take space.
Yes.
Take your space. And that's something I talk about constantly today. But yeah, very disheartening.
Yes. You're talking, you were almost saying sorry.
No, go ahead.
That, you wanted to be invisible. And that's so sad. And it's so pervasive. I don't want to be noticed. And here you are, as all people are these incredible, amazing individuals who have a spark of life and a uniqueness that gets stifled and silenced and pushed aside and dismissed.
When did your grandmother realize that there might be a problem?
Great question, Linda. Great question. I just had her on for one of our first recovery stories we did together. So me and her talking about my recovery, which was, woo! Y'all, if you have never talked about it with your parents or your carers about recovery, that's a good test and a good trial, right?
Yeah.
And it's a great learning experience as well. But it's interesting when she was sharing her part of her recovery, of my recovery story and her perspective of it. She noticed as soon as I was younger, when I was a younger teen, and that was because our relationship had always been two peas in a pod. Ever since that time when I got put in the back of that police car and she committed to being my person, she was always my person. And she was always the person I'd call. I'd tell her about someone who was bullying me. I'd tell her all the pretty, the ugly, and everything in between. And when I was in my young teens, I told her nothing. That switch was very prevalent to her. That switch in my behavior and how I was showing up in the world was very obvious to her. And she was very concerned. She didn't know what to do because she was like, oh, maybe this is part of teenage. Maybe I'm missing something, right? Maybe it's me, right? But little did she know it wasn't her. It was my eating disorder. And it was getting more and more active. So it would have me lock myself in the room, lock myself in the bathroom. I would go missing. I would just go on walks and just hide, right? I just didn't want to be around anyone or explain what was going on with me because I already felt shameful. And there was no one having conversations, especially in the BIPOC community around this. Mm-hmm. Now, for white individuals, it was okay, my counterparts could get it, right? But for me, I barely have insurance. I'm on public assistance, right? I already have all these other things going on. So I can't really, my grandma's working 60 hours a week, right? I can't really tell her. I didn't want to stress her out and put more burden on her. And so for me, it was just I'm gonna be alone and I'll isolate. And that's kind of how my eating disorder tied me in. But my grandmother, she really she got that awareness beforehand and knew something was coming up, but she really didn't understand until I was talking to my doctor, and my doctor a bit ignored my concerns. So I told him, hey, I'm noticing these changes. Also, I do these things to purposely make myself throw up. And I told him all these things, and he said, oh, your BMI looks fine. Everything's all good, right? And had all these reactions and told my grandmother, she's fine. She's going to be okay. So my grandmother at that point, she knew there was something, but there was nothing to be done, right? So she just kept her eye on it, would check in on me, and kind of took a back seat. Again, with that lack of education, what else can you do? It was years later that my dentist, because you have to, being on public assistance, you have to go see a dentist and a doctor regularly. Luckily, my dentist saw the tooth decay and was like, something's really wrong. I saw Makailah last year, and Makailah did not, even 2 years ago, there is something happening year to year. Mm-hmm. Brought my grandma in after I told him what was happening, and I told him I was comfortable, and we disclosed to my grandma that I had a full-blown eating disorder. And in that, my dentist called my doctor and said, what is going on? Right? And sent over all the paperwork.
And that's not unusual for a dentist to be the first one to know.
It is unusual for the dentist to actually acknowledge, follow through, take action. And that's this is an incredible story because all of it is absolutely continuing to happen today to far too many people. And you sharing this is incredible because that's what happens. And your grandma, she didn't know. Nobody was talking about eating disorders, especially in the BIPOC community. There was no common conversation about, hey, this goes on. It's not only teenage behaviors, but as you talk about that isolation and locking yourself in the room, yeah, the eating disorder was thriving.
But all the stuff you had going on inside,
Yeah.
it had to be a very lonely, sad time for you.
Scary.
Yeah.
Scary.
I think about that for individuals out there who don't even know, right? Because I didn't even know. So, and that's still an ongoing issue, Ellen, you're highlighting, is people don't even know that, like, oh, eating disorders can, like, we can treat them.
Yeah.
There's an R word, there's recovery, like, that's a thing. Like, individuals don't even understand that. Like, they think they have to live a life like this. The whole life has to be just this torment. And that's just not true.
No.
So
it's been normalized to some extent.
Yeah, when you're going through it, you feel like you're the only person in the world with these behaviors. Especially a few years ago. I guess eating disorders, we have a very long way to go, but at least people are talking about them more now. So when did you start getting better? Did you get formalized treatment?
It's a great question, Linda. So this story even gets rougher a little bit, unfortunately. So after my dentist had called my doctor that following year, we'd noticed that my grades were already dropping. Obviously mental health reasons and my eating disorder. And we also caught that, so when I was born, for context for everyone, I was not born, again, in the greatest circumstances. Going back to my first memory of being in a police car, I was not born in great circumstances. So I was born to a teenage mother that was unfortunately on a substance when I was born. So when I came out, I was at a higher risk of having a disability. Well, it turns out they found out I had a disability when I was younger. So I was deaf in my right ear. Well, let's skip to 10 years later. Once they found that out and everything else, they also found out I was going deaf in my left ear. And so that's why I was actually struggling in school. So while I got this diagnosis for my eating disorder, which is like public assistance looks at it and it's like, okay, we can deal with this, right? Because every kid in the state is guaranteed a certain amount of money, right? When you're on public assistance. Well, it's tough for individuals who have multiple things going on. So I had not only my eating disorder, but I also had my disability that had to be treated. So while they found out my hearing was going out in my right ear and I was deaf in my left ear, they had to give me a very expensive cochlear transplant, which led to no formalized treatment for my eating disorder. So in that, I was granted therapy services. So I was able to go to therapy and my grandma was able to go to therapy and we were able to see individuals. But for me, I talk about my recovery in the sense of it was a lot of trial and error. Like I had to figure it out on my own. There was no one walking me through it. There was no treatments that I'd be like, hey, Mac, actually, maybe you shouldn't go back to the gym this week. That doesn't sound like a great idea, right? Like there was no one in my corner to tell me, hey, this is actually what nutrition looks like. Yeah. This is what it looks like to have a dietitian and have nutrition support. And so for me, I was not only balancing my disability, but I was also balancing my eating disorder. And unfortunately, my disability had to take priority at that point. And that was a really tough conversation. Even when my grandma talked about it in her recovery story, sharing her perspective of it, she talks about this guilt she has as a parent. And I think about this for all carers. First off, you shouldn't hold that guilt, even though I know you still are holding the guilt as you're listening to my words. That guilt is still there, but guilt wasn't put on by you all. It was by the systems at play. It's something so much larger than us that it's not even funny, right? It's something that we can't control. It's like saying I can control something on the moon. I cannot control anything on the moon. And I think the same thing for you all as carers. It's just extremely, extremely tough, but a lot of guilt that came into that decision of my disability over my eating disorder.
Well, and how unjust and inequitable that you should have had comprehensive care and treatment and access to beyond. Okay. There's my little comment,
So I have a question here. And what were the most helpful things throughout your journey? What set you back? And what was your college experience like? Where were you at that point?
Oh, I'll start with my college experience and then go into things that helped and didn't help, if that's helpful.
Yep.
My college experience, I left Idaho, y'all. It's beautiful. It's a great state, but I left and I went to the East Coast for school. I went to Rhode Island, Johnson & Wales University. Shout out to all of you Wildcats. But I went out there. That's where I went. I went to one of the most diverse schools. I said, I need to see my BIPOC fellows, my queer fellows. College changed my freaking life. I was able to come out of the closet as bisexual. I was able to, I say this in a term of like, I was able to come out as a person of color. Like I was someone who was hiding the fact that I was a person of color while I was in Idaho. I would wear makeup that was 10 times lighter than my skin. I woke up every day for school at 5 a.m. to straighten my hair. It took me 2 hours to straighten my hair before school, just so it would be perfect, right? And I would look like my other counterparts. So for me, when I left and I went to the East Coast, I said, I'm wearing my locks, I'm wearing my fro, I am doing whatever I want to do. I am going on dates with girls. I don't care who tells me what. Like I was living my best life. And college actually, it's interesting in doing that. I actually, by living my truest self and being in my identity, my recovery thrived. I was in the best point of my recovery. And that's where I actually point out, and I'm like, that's where I actually really started holding on to my recovery and keeping it as sacred versus treating it as a toy, right? Like it was just there. I'd keep it, it'd be there, but I didn't know how serious I was about it until I got that freedom and that independence to be myself. And I said, oh, heck no. I'm never going back to a place where I wake up at 5 a.m. to straighten my hair. What the heck was I doing? How many hours of my life had I wasted, like not being myself? So yeah, college was an experience where, you know, for some, college can be really tough for us in our eating disorders. But for me, college shaped my recovery in the best way possible. And on top of that, my college had free on-campus resources for therapists, things like that. So even though I didn't have health insurance all through college, I was able to have health care, which was so important. So important. And the things that helped me once I was kind of out and in this recovery, I have my, you know this, Linda, I had my list of like what keeps my recovery going. So I'll kind of like highlight a couple of things. And I want to say that like, it's okay if you all don't have a list. If you have like, you don't need those boundaries, mad respect to you. As someone who didn't get professional treatment and someone who had to like figure it out and yo-yo, I have to have these boundaries in my own recovery. I just have to, or else it wouldn't be as tight as it is today. So like one of my biggest pieces, and Ellen, this will be new for you, but I have no social media. The only place you'll catch me on is LinkedIn. And that's like my professional social media, and that's it. So if you ever want to talk to me or get in contact, catch me on LinkedIn, but you will never catch me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, any of those things, because it's never benefited me or benefited our communities.
Bravo. I love that. How incredible that you can say, this is my number one. I don't need it. That's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I had to. I don't need it. It benefits communities in different senses, but for me and my own personal inner community, it didn't benefit me. I wasn't getting anything out of it that was at risk to my own recovery, right? I'd outweigh it, right? What's the risk to the reward? And let me tell you, that risk wasn't worth it. In that, I learned no gyms for Mac. Again, going back to what I said before, I wish someone had told me don't go back to the gym, because I would have never went back to the gym. I went back to the gym when I was in high school, and I had a pretty bad relapse from that. And I realized that gyms were not my space. When I walked into a gym, I felt like everyone was looking at me, which if you go to a gym, people are looking at other people, and there are mirrors everywhere. And it's a sense of this feeling that I couldn't rub, and I never got positivity out of it. Yeah. Now, for some of us, joyful movement can be found in the gym, but for me, it couldn't. A lot of things that also worked was like no restaurants with calories on the menu. I won't do it. I just won't. I won't put myself in a position where I have to make decisions based off of a number on a menu. No, thank you.
I love this list. It's incredible. Keep going. Keep going.
This girl knows herself.
I know myself. I think that self-actualization is key in recovery. Also, joyful movement only. So I run I help run a Big Gal Hikers Club. So It's a really cool club where we basically get to go out on the trails and walk together as big gals, and we get to take breaks whenever we want. We have no judgments, no shames, and we usually do shorter distances, so it's more accessible for all individuals. I absolutely love that group, and that's my form of joyful movement. I don't have to go to the gym. I can go hiking with my big gals, which is awesome.
And what's not better than joyful movement? Oh my gosh. Love
Makes you feel
this.
good.
Yes.
Linda and Ellen. What's your joyful movement? If like putting you on the spot right now, I'm curious. What's your joyful movement?
Water, swimming, and yoga. And stretchings that I do on my own, taking a walk, being outside. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love being outside when the weather is nice. I don't like it so much in the wintertime, but I love going for a walk. I love being by the water. I love going to the ocean. Not that I get to go there much, but just nature. I'm fascinated by birds and nature and just the stillness that it brings at the same time that I'm moving. And I like yoga, absolutely. I don't know. I love to take a hot bath. Just doing that the morning that I don't have to take a shower, that I can just take a hot bath, my day is always better. So, I just not rushing, just being mindful brings me joy and helps me appreciate everything a little bit more and everybody a little bit more.
It changes your life, right? And it changes your day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You embracing your authentic self and saying it is such a joyful expression of saying, yeah, I'm owning who I am. This is me, and I love me, and this is great. And these are things I need, and these are things I don't need. And it's so beautiful, and you express it so well, and it's words of wisdom for so many.
Right.
To just take, honor who you are.
I appreciate that, Ellen, because one of my last things on my list was to be in spaces where I'm celebrated and not tolerated. And that's probably like one of the biggest things for me is like we have to be in spaces as individuals who are in recovery, to be in places where if I go into a room, Linda's going to be like, hey, Mac, it was great to see you last week. Oh, look at all the cool things you're doing. And I go back to Linda and I'm like, yeah, Linda, let's talk about this. Versus being in spaces where you couldn't share your full identity or even share yourself because you're nervous about what the other person is going to say.
Yes.
It'd be really tough. So I just want to say thank you for that, really, Ellen.
Absolutely, because we all have to create and be in supportive communities where you are acknowledged and celebrated and embraced. And it's having that conversation to encourage others to do that and bring that awareness forward.
And it's not everybody who needs to be in your community. We have communities that are good for us and people that are good for us, and there needs to be boundaries sometimes, but we can thrive and heal in supportive communities, and we do, no matter what you're dealing with, whether it's a physical illness or a mental illness. You're fortunate enough to get treatment, you finish healing in your community. And it's really important to have people around you that you can talk to and that have your back.
I love it. Hey, we have to get to a very important question from Jack. And we really would like to know a little bit more about your position at Equip and what you do and what that means as a lead peer mentor.
Oh, and I forgot at the beginning to say that all the links for today's show are in the show notes, and that's very important as Makailah shares the answer to these questions, this one in particular.
Yes, all my links are tied to this question in particular and all the work I do in and outside of Equip. So I'm super excited to be talking about this. It's funny because when I found Equip, I was pursuing my career in research. So for me, I was like, I never thought I'd be a peer mentor, to be really transparent with you all. And so when I found this job, I read the job posting and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And I applied and I was like, let's see where this goes, right? And I will tell you right now, the role has changed my life. I mean, Equip has changed my life 180. I'm dedicating my whole career to this field now. I'm going back for my master's this fall for a master's in public population health management, just so I can dedicate myself more to this field. So I will say that job posting saved my life. Shout out to Equip.
Woo-hoo.
Equip is the leading, I know, right?
Yeah.
Equip is the leading virtual eating disorder treatment. They offer FBT, CBT. They treat in all 50 states in the United States. They're doing groundbreaking work as it
That's
relates
huge, and
to,
that's new. All 50 states. Like, that's like,
Yes.
wow. There is access to treatment in all 50 states. Huge.
and fully virtual, right? So it's accessible, and it's created by a full treatment team. So you're not only getting a therapist, right? And then that's it. You're getting a therapist, a dietitian, a peer mentor for yourself to see individuals, a family mentor for the carers who are caring for that individual with the eating disorder. How awesome would that have been for my grandma, or for you, Linda, or for you, Ellen?
Yes.
Life changing, right?
Yes.
And then you've got a med psych provider. You've got you've got everything you need, right, tied up in one treatment program versus going to 5 different providers, which is so inaccessible itself, and getting formalized true care. So Equip is incredible. My role as a lead peer mentor is the peer mentor part is that I get to share my lived experience, teach skills, listen to people with eating disorders, and really support them, right? It's an additional space for them to have one-to-one support. Peer mentorship and like peer support itself is changing lives. I think, scratch that. I know for a fact this is something that's going to be around for years and years to come, past me, past all of us, right? And I mean, you look at it from the sense of like, look at AA, right? Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. They started off with peer mentorship work in the beginning. They're really the framework and the groundwork for everything that's coming in the eating disorder field and coming to all these other fields. And it's been extremely successful. So I think it's incredible, the fact that peer mentorship is here. But that's what I do on the peer mentor side. And on the lead side, I get to lead peer mentors, which is really, really awesome. I think our team is incredible. I already know that. And we're doing really, really important work. Equip itself has always supported my endeavors as it relates to public speaking around BIPOC communities, as it relates to having Black History Month conversations. I think about all the initiatives I've taken on with Equip, and it's never stopped. They've never said no, if that makes sense. So
it makes incredible sense.
The reason why they're in 50 states, right?
And the need is huge because so many people are marginalized and dismissed and don't have access. So what you're doing is so incredibly important. And you're right. You have a full career ahead of leading the charge.
We're trying, Ellen.
Yes.
Absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit about the other organizations that you volunteer with?
Of course, I'd love to. Of course, I got to start off with ANAD. So if you've not heard about ANAD, you should definitely click their link down at the bottom if you have not had the chance. I've been volunteering with them for a year, and this year's changed my life. I know I said Equip changed my life, but then ANAD came and then double changed my life. You know what I mean? Really, really incredible work they're doing over there. ANAD is the leading nonprofit in the U.S. for free peer support community for anyone struggling with an eating disorder. So you can get peer support. There is free group support. There are free resources on the website. You can even email them. They have community outreach supporters that can help for you. There's care initiatives. What they're doing, everything is free and accessible. So it's virtual and it's accessible and free. Big highlight. I love that.
Huge.
I love that word.
Huge.
F-R-E-E.
Free and accessible. Right? Oh my God. Yes.
Yes, life-changing work. And there I'm a lead support group. So I lead support group facilitators, and then I also run my own support groups. And then I serve as on their community engagement committee. So the community engagement committee is a really cool new initiative that their director of community engagement has taken on, Jason Wood. Jason Wood is doing incredible
Amazing
work in the eating disorder field. Amazing work. I mean, we're going to see them at MEDA, right?
Yes.
We're going to see them. So
Yes.
I'm really excited to see him present, but he is doing fabulous work in terms of creating this committee of diverse individuals to be able to speak about eating disorder recovery in ways that we haven't talked about it from a transgender point of view, from a neurodivergent point of view, from a BIPOC point of view, versus just the same story we've been hearing. Jason is making sure we're changing the narrative. So big shout out to you, Jason, if you're listening to this.
Absolutely. And I have, within the past 4 years, there have been such significant shifts, ANAD, in how ANAD is approaching the conversation and what they do. And EQUIP, they've gone to 50 states in the past, like within a very short period of time. And so that access is just game-changing, so needed, and the only way we're going to be able to have the capacity to meet the need.
Well, and the beauty of that, I mean, there's lots of beauty in this format, but the beauty is that the person is not taken away from their community and the support that's around them. I hear so many people in our support groups just talk about all the things that they missed. They missed a family vacation. They missed a wedding. They missed a graduation from a sibling. And it just makes it that much harder for them to reconnect. Their friends move on, people move on, and you still have your family, but you've missed so many monumental moments that it's got to be very hard. And sometimes I'm sure sometimes it's necessary, but again, we can't put everybody in the same box, and it's great that there's this alternative to starting to heal, to beginning to heal, and that works for many.
Exactly, Linda. I think you're highlighting the biggest piece of that is a lot of people, that's the fear, right? I have to go 2.5, personally for me, I was in Northern Idaho, right? So the idea of going 2.5 hours, 3 hours away to get somewhere for treatment is unrealistic for many. Think about the cost of gas. That's expensive, right?
Oh, God. The majority.
Right? If you have a car, there are so many pieces we don't even think about in a social determinant of a health lens. And we need to be having those conversations, because if we're not, then we're not actually creating care for all. We're just creating care for one population. It's very interesting. On top of all that, I also serve, just to highlight, I want to highlight AED because they're doing great work as well. So AED is also known as the Academy of Eating Disorders. They're an international organization that was founded in 1993. The Academy for Eating Disorders helps physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, nutritionists, academic researchers, students, and experts through lived experience connections and collaborate with each other to keep abreast recent developments in eating disorder research. I serve on their DEIB board there, and DEIB is also known as Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Serving on that board, my biggest intention is to make sure that the research is representative of everyone that we're seeing, inclusive, equitable, that we're not just picking research that is the easiest and the most funded, right? Because that's what we've been doing for the last 50 years.
Yeah. And the research has left out many, many aspects that should be included so that we have comprehensive, appropriate research and determining practices for everyone. And this conversation today of really talking about the inequities, I'm just have to emphasize it and say it is so real. Because, for example, in New York State, if you're on, I was squishing a paper and making noise, got to confess here. If you are on, if you have Medicare or state-issued health insurance and you're struggling with an eating disorder, you don't have access to a dietitian. You don't have access to one of the pillars that's going to. And so, as you said about the virtual treatment is really going to be it is the way to go, but it's communicating out to everyone, all communities, that there is treatment, and eating disorders are just dismissing all the myths that are surrounded by shame and stigma that detract from people getting the help that they need. Eating disorders, anybody can have one. And so everybody needs to have access to treatment. And it's such a huge issue, and I think there is such a huge level of awareness, and it's so encouraging to see that the organizations that you're working with and volunteering are bringing it to the forefront and making everyone aware.
That's great. Very well said.
Ellen went, equability, equal access.
Equal access. It must happen. I want to cry every time I hear that somebody, they can't because they don't. And I'm like, what? They're diagnosed. They need it. They have everything, but they can't. What? Or the transportation issue that we just discussed. The reality that people don't have the money to pay for the gas to get to treatment is all too real. Right. And then it also, that level of communicating out that free virtual access is available is so important. Right. So important.
And we're very honored to have, or I'm very honored to have Makailah help us co-facilitate our monthly meetings Forward Together for adults with eating disorders. Makailah has a wonderful way of building people up and finding the positive. Talk about motivational interviewing. She's just, you're very gifted, and it's wonderful to facilitate with you and be part of all the things that you're doing. And it's the beauty of all this is that it's not just people from your community, it's people from all over. And I think sometimes that knowing that there's a world beyond where you live can be a very helpful thing too for people who are struggling. So we've talked about the BIPOC experience in healthcare and the community and providing affordable and accessible care for all, which is so important for everyone and certainly underserved communities. You also share a passion about disability advocacy. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Makailah?
Yes, definitely. As you heard previously in my story, I had to pick, right? It was my disability or it was my eating disorder. And in that, I became very invested in disability advocacy because I knew that no one understood what their rights were at school, what their rights were in a workplace as it related to this, especially people who are lower economic status and individuals who are on public assistance. We unfortunately did not have the privilege to understand what our rights were. I didn't even know what a 504 was, never had one in place. Probably would have changed my life, to be really transparent with you all, for my own educational well-being. But I just didn't have it because we didn't even know what it was. My grandma didn't have the time. She worked 60 hours a week. She couldn't go into school and be like, hey, y'all, show me all the resources and tell me everything you know. Because they weren't even telling her, right? They weren't giving her the phone call.
Information isn't volunteered. It's not shared.
No, it's not shared, right? They knew I was deaf, but the information still wasn't volunteered or shared. So that was really, really tough. And so I got really lucky for the last 2 years of my high school experience. I got to be on VOC rehab. So vocational rehab is a state-by-state program offered to individuals with a disability. And vocational rehab is life-changing. It was able to pay for part of my schooling. They also showed me the rights of what I had in a workplace as it related to my hearing. And so in that, I ended up volunteering at an Idaho blind and deaf camp for 2 summers. when I got onto campus as a college student, I ended up doing disability advocacy for those who could not afford it and didn't even understand it. So I was able to help a lot of individuals on my school campus implement 504s and what that would look like for them and what kind of support they would need. So disability advocacy is something I do on the side of all the stuff I already do. And I dedicate myself to it because if I didn't know what I knew back then, I would have been going into school so lost. I would have been going into college failing. I would have been failed in a different capacity, right? I was already failed in the healthcare manner. I couldn't be failed educationally as well. So I knew that I needed to be educated on this and others needed to know this education. So I dedicate myself to that. That's my side hustle, if I could say that, right? My side passion that I keep thriving, because if I'm not having the conversation, and then I know for a fact others aren't, because you highlighted something, Ellen. People aren't volunteering this information.
No.
Just like eating disorders, no one's just like throwing it out there and letting you know. You kind of have to dig it up a little bit.
You have to struggle just a little. And it's so unfair because everyone in those situations have already struggled. And so you need advocates like you that are empowering people and saying, hey, this is out there. And the whole aspect of the inequity for individuals with disabilities is so real. I've recently encountered a young woman who has an eating disorder and also is part of the deaf community. And if she does not have access to an interpreter, she cannot fully engage in peer support. And that was just an awakening moment for me to be like, oh my God, this can't be happening. We have to have the tools, the access, so that access is equitable. So there are a lot of things that need to be done, but it's people like you who are really advocating and making that change happen and raising awareness. And I have to add one little more thing for you and just say that when, I know this is the same for Jack and Linda, when we meet individuals who are recovered, who have struggled, and who now are advocating and helping others and supporting, you're a huge inspiration for us because we see what wasn't. I'm going to crack on this one. We see the potential and what you can do. And it's like seeing our children reflected in everything that you're doing.
In that voice, there's no stronger voice than the voice that of someone who's been there and lived it. And no matter how hard it was, that came out the other side. And I do believe that if our system were a better system and people didn't fall through the cracks right and left, that Emily and Katie would still be here because they were exceptional humans too. And we thank you. We thank you for paying it forward for so many other people. I'm sure the ripple effect, you will never know the ripple effect that you and people like you have. And it does. It fills us up. Absolutely.
It's all of you who are paying it forward, doing this work that inspire us and know that change is going to continue. Change is going to happen. It's going to be for the better. And it just makes everything that we've gone through be like, okay.
Right.
Okay. It's going to be okay. And so,
and we're
honor of all that you do, and thank you so much.
And it's people like you that make it easier for us not to put our heads in the sand and just be sad. We'll always be sad, but we just want to make a difference for the people who struggle and for their family members. There's so many ways to communicate, and there's so many ways that we can do it better as a support person in any relationship, but certainly when you're dealing with an eating disorder or any mental illness that has shame and stigma associated with it. So, okay.
We're back on track. We're back on track.
I have a Jack question because we can't just cry here. But Jack wanted me to ask you about your dog. We've heard so many people where a pet has been such an important part of recovery. So he wanted you to tell everybody about your dog. And do you think there should be therapy dogs for people with long-term eating disorders?
Oh, absolutely. I feel bad for everyone who's like, I don't like pets. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but if you were at my treatment center, I would be giving puppies out left and right. Because I will say I got my dog Paddle. I got him 3 years ago. He's actually sleeping right next to me. I dress him every day of the week. He has clothes for every day. I always joke. I'm like, if he could have a social security number, he should, because he's basically like my kid. He's changed my whole life. I'm someone where I've always known since a young age that I will never have children. It's not something in the books for me, and that's totally okay. But I think there's a lot of stigma, especially from a female standpoint, of like not having children, right? And this expectation to have children. And so I was always lost in that, especially after college, and a lot of expectations weighing on me. And when I got Paddle, he changed my whole life. He's like my best friend, and the unconditional love you get from a pet is, you meet those people where you're like, why did you spend that much money on an animal? And you're like, what happened? And I'm one of those people. I was like, what the heck happened? I fell in love with a little being that really changed my life. And I think pet therapy itself can change people's lives, right? Because you'll always have someone there that will unconditionally love you, that will kiss you when you probably don't want to be kissed, and that's totally okay. And doesn't understand the idea of consent and agency, but you can work on it with your pet. But what's really cool with it is that it's always there. He's always there for me. I wake up at 2 a.m. and I'm having a hard time. He's there. I wake up in the morning and I feel like it's going to be a bad day. And I'm like, today's the day I have to be body neutral because it's not a body positive day, right? He's there. Anytime I have to make a decision to go joyful movement versus not, he's there. I'll take my dog on a walk. You can take your cat on a walk. I found out they have cat bags. You can take your cats everywhere now, right? There is no reason. I think pets are one of the most loveliest things on this earth. And it's one of the things that has helped with mental health. I'm surprised there isn't more research, especially in the eating disorder field and pets, because I think about the isolation of an eating disorder and the isolation that can be pulled out from your own pet is very interesting. So I'd be curious to see the research that does come. But thank you, Jack. I don't know where you're at, but I just want to say thank you for admiring my baby.
He wishes he could be here today, but he wasn't feeling well today. So, but we had to get his questions in here for sure. And, those pets need you. I mean, they need us as much as we need them. So, okay. Ellen.
This has been absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to add or like people to know before we go?
Oh, Ellen, you both have been fabulous. I think about Katie and I think about Emily as like we're doing this. And I thought about all the dialectics you were holding, Ellen, as you were like crying. And I wanted to cry with you because I felt like, yes, this work can be extremely sad and it can be extremely empowering and it can be extremely beautiful and it can be extremely hard and it can be extremely ugly. It can be all the ands in a bucket. And I want you to know that like we're all holding those ands, we're all holding those dialectics, and it can feel like a wild, wide ride sometimes. So thank you for not letting me stick my head in the sand. And always, Linda, thank you because you changed my life when I met you. When I told you, hey, I'd love to do free support groups, what do you think about that? You didn't even say no. You didn't say anything. You went, yep, let's sign up next month. Okay, got it on the calendar. Let me put, what's your pronouns? Okay, perfect. You made sure everything was right and you said yes, and you dedicated spaces back for free spaces to families and to individuals who needed support. And I can't express how grateful I am because you saw the passion that I had and you just you threw gasoline on it, which is a good thing because I want more gasoline on the passion. So the biggest thing though that I want to highlight is that earlier this year during Eating Disorder Awareness Week 2024, I did a presentation at Northwestern University for This Is My Brave. And if you all don't know, you should go check them out. But This Is My Brave is an organization that promotes mental health awareness through the performance of performance art and public speaking. I ended up doing a spoken word that highlighted the fact that, you know, one of my big lines was, no one told me the beauty of a Black body, and no one told me the beauty of my body. And that's something like I want to leave with all the listeners today, is that no one ever told me this beauty, but there is beauty there, right? And the story is the same for many individuals in the world. So know that that is your beauty, and that we all have different beauty, and it's beautiful. Find your community and share that beauty. And I think the biggest piece of this, especially coming from my story, is don't let anyone take it away from you.
You are heaven sent.
Yes.
I said that from the beginning, and I'm sure Ellen feels that way now too. So thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful, Makailah. Okay, thank you, listeners. Our daughters and you are the reason we do this podcast. And a warm thank you to Rockvox Recording and Production and Scott Fitzgerald, sound engineer extraordinaire, for expertly producing our podcast and so much more.
Help us continue the conversations. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces on the podcast and platform you're listening to us today on. Tell your family and friends about us and check out our show notes to learn more about Makailah Dowell and her wonderful work and the eating disorder nonprofit she volunteers her time with, and learn more about Jack, Linda, and their book Emily, the story of a girl and her family hijacked by anorexia, and their nonprofit, the Emily Connection.
And learn more about Ellen Bennett and her nonprofit, KMB for Answers. Please remember how important these conversations are, because everybody's mental health matters. And if you are looking for a place to record your podcast, record your audiobook, or do a legacy cast for your loved ones, Rockvox Recording and Production is our recommendation. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.